After nearly a decade of part-time game development, I decided that I needed to be all in if I was ever going to be successful. Hello and welcome. My name is Peter. I'm the sole developer behind Growlery games. I'm working on the first title, Risk and Riches, which is a roguelike deck builder where you must descend into a mine fighting hordes of monsters and demons to close a portal to hell, all while building a thriving mining town. But this isn't my first game. Like many of you, games are a passion of mine. My first games included Doom, Command & Conquer, and Dino Park Tycoon. The real nostalgic years for me, though, are when I got an N64. All the great games like Ocarina of Time, playing GoldenEye with friends, and ripping my hand open playing those stupid mini games from Mario Party. I ended up going to school for game development and received a bachelor's in game development and a master's in game design from Full Sail University. I've done game jams, released hobbyist projects and student projects, been credited in a couple of mobile games, and worked on commercial software. But along the way, I ended up on an entirely different career path. For 8 years, I worked as a campaign consultant and manager on political campaigns in Massachusetts. But during that time, I couldn't shake the desire to work on games and software. I mean, that's what I always wanted to do. So I attempted to work on games part-time while working as a political consultant, and that created a further realization that part-time for me just wasn't going to cut it. Working on campaigns is very cyclical, and while I could start working on something when things were slow, once work on the campaign intensified, it was extremely difficult to find the time and energy to continue working on my software projects. Campaigns have their own version of crunch.
Ready or not, this is crunch time.
And I'd have to drop everything I was doing on the side and just focus on the campaign during those times. Many others have made part-time game development work, and I admire them for it, but it just didn't suit me and what I was doing at the time. Being away for months or even a year meant that by the time I came back, I didn't remember what was going on, or I didn't have the motivation to keep working on that particular project. I had new ideas, and so often it just meant the end of that project. In the 8 years that I was doing this on again, off again development, only one project really made it pretty far. It was actually an enterprise software for elected officials, but in the end I had to kill that too because it wasn't scalable from a business perspective. And it just became increasingly clear after years of doing this that, at least for me, like, part-time software development was a problem. I needed the extra pressure of knowing there was no safety net, that I had to get things done on a set timeline. It was an identity thing. I didn't view myself as a game developer anymore. I was a political consultant that knew how to program and did software on the side as a hobby. And that mindset was holding me back. I needed to break out of it. But at the same time, the risk of leaving the jobs that were making me money to leap into this uncertain future was too much. But all of that changed mid 2023 when I experienced a very personal and profound loss. Last summer, my father passed away unexpectedly. He was only 60, and while it impacted me in a lot of ways, there are 3 big ways in which it changed the trajectory of my career. As the oldest of 2 siblings, a lot of the responsibilities fell on me for handling his affairs, and luckily at the time the campaign I was working on was in a lull, so I could get all of that in order. But in the months following his passing, we had to go through his things, clear out his house, make sure stuff got to various family members and such. And there are a couple of things that I found that really struck a chord in me. The first is a quote from Theodore Roosevelt that was displayed in my father's house before, and it reads, "Far better is it to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with those poor spirits who never enjoy much nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows not victory nor defeat. The second was one of those wind-up music boxes from a greeting card. I actually keep it in my desk drawer next to where I work. I won't play it now. It's the tune on it is "My Way" from Frank Sinatra, which, if you're not familiar with it, please go listen to it after the video. And both of these suited my father pretty well, but it really drove home the point for me at a time that I was debating on what to do next career-wise. And that was the first way that his passing, affected the trajectory of my career. None of us know when we're going to go, but so many of us, at least I feel, eke out mundane life, feeling comfortable, but never challenging ourselves and doing something that would truly make us happy. The second way my father's passing affected the trajectory of my career, it's not one that I'm proud of, but it's simple reality of it. When my father passed, I inherited a decent amount of money, nothing crazy, but enough that my runway to get a studio off the ground was drastically extended. There are self-funded developers out there who started studios by saving money over years, splitting the cost amongst multiple founders, or even people who sold a house. But none of those options were there for me. My working campaigns didn't pay enough for me to save up to go years without a paycheck. The most I could probably swing was a year. And the fantasy of creating a game and that game becoming big, like Stardew Valley or Super Meat Boy or Hollow Knight, most of the time it's just that, it's a fantasy. It takes multiple releases for a lot of studios to make anything that's a financial success. With the money that I inherited, I can now realistically both finance the studio and live off of it for at least 3 years without needing a paycheck to sustain myself. I'm also fortunate enough to have a wife that has a decent job and owns the home that we live in. And right now we don't have any children, so I don't have to worry about supporting them. Those 3 years though, that I think that this gives me is crucial, because it means that I don't have the opportunity to release more than one game, and that I'm not betting everything on this first title, which statistically is not going to cross $10,000 in revenue. I hope it does. I'm putting the effort in, to try and rise above that $10,000 threshold. But most first-time indie releases don't do well, and 70% of all games released on Steam each year make less than $10,000. So that financial support doesn't eliminate all the risk in taking on this venture, but it greatly reduced it to a point that I could feel comfortable taking it on. Lastly, my father's passing raised this question about legacy. As I said, I don't have children, and honestly, I'm not sure that I want kids someday. But like most people, I have a desire, to impact the world beyond just myself and my immediate surroundings, and ideally something that persists after I'm gone. But not only did my father's passing make me think about my legacy, but his as well. Does my branch of the family tree just end with me? For me, though, I don't think that legacy includes just passing on your genes. It's also the actions and achievements that we undertake in life. And this was reinforced by my recent experience at PAX East. For those of us that play games, it makes sense that games have an impact on us and who we've become. and not in negative ways that are perpetuated in decades past. I credit Final Fantasy X for being more open-minded about cultures and ways of life that are different than mine. And even to this day, I cherish the relationships I made playing Call of Duty with my clan members. Even though now we just interact with the occasional like on Facebook. And in many ways, games help people get through tough times and overcome mental health issues. And this was talked about over and over again, and in the dozens of stories that people had while I was at PAX, and the panelists, which include some psychologists, spoke about. And there are certainly some negative aspects to games, right? I mean, we've all experienced bullying and toxic environments that can occur online. But on the whole, even games that are purely just entertainment, there's someone somewhere that that game helped them get through something, or it helped them grow. And this really enforced my decision to go back to making games full time. Part of why I left games initially was the existential crisis of wanting to make a positive change in the world. But between the realization all games can make a difference and the questions of legacy, it crystallized my resolve to found a studio and make it happen now. And so here I am, 3 months after founding Growlery Games, and I'm not regretting it. I'm stressed for sure, but my mood, my health, everything is much better since I made that switch in January. So much so that my wife's commented on it. I had a physical recently, and my blood pressure's down. And so, as far as my mental and physical health, it's been tremendous for me. And I'm committed to getting Growlery Games off the ground and becoming a long-term financial success. And that's all well and good for me, right? But how is this applicable to you? If you found this channel, I'm guessing that you're interested in game development, maybe gonna make your own game, or thinking about starting your own studio. And like most honest answers, it depends. It depends on a lot of factors. If you're just starting out, have no experience, there's the question of going to school or being self-taught through online courses and tutorials. Both can be viable options, but at least for me, I still wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't go to school. There are great developers out there who are self-taught. Almost everybody who founded this industry was self-taught. But it depends on your learning style and circumstances. School could be a huge jumpstart for you in your career. I watch people who've been making games for years as indie devs who are self-taught, and I can tell they're still struggling with things that I would consider fundamentals, especially with programming. If you have the time and resources, please consider it, is what I would say. Don't write off going to school because somebody on YouTube told you, oh, you definitely don't need it, right? When they've been working on their game for 5 years, and in the same breath are trying to pitch you their courses that they'll sell you for $500. Right? There are great resources online, like CodeMonkey for Unity development if school's not an option for you, or if you're someone who does better on self-guided study. But you need to be careful. There are people who don't know what they're doing, who put together a few simple courses, slap a price tag on it, and market it like they're an expert. And I see that as the biggest danger for anybody that's trying to go the self-taught route, is wading through all the money grabs and scams that have been put up over the years. But hey, if you're from the United States like me, college is becoming overpriced, student loans are a major problem, and there have definitely been some schools that were nothing but money grabs. All I'm trying to say is don't rule out going to an accredited college or university. At least in my experience, it was a huge jumpstart. I've seen a lot of my classmates go on to have successful careers in the industry, and it gave me a foundation that I otherwise wouldn't have had trying to piece together, tutorials and videos here and there. If you've already got some experience and knowledge and are ready to start your studio, what I'd say to you is give yourself long enough of a runway. As I said, and as you've probably seen on other indie dev channels, your first game is likely not going to be a smash hit. It's not impossible, but if you're being honest with yourself, you're not going to be the exception. I'm not going to be the exception, which is why I'm planning on getting multiple games out the door before I make the big decision of whether or not to continue. If you don't know who Chris Zukowski is, look him up. He has a lot of great marketing advice, but in one of his talks, something that stuck with me as a great example of this miscalculation of what your first game will do is a chart where it shows the number of studios that release one game and then the amount that release 2, 3, 4 games. And the drop off is huge. So many studios start up and they're relying on that first game to be a major financial success, or they just assume it will be. And then they don't meet those sales numbers, and so they either can't afford to keep going or they become discouraged and quit. If you don't have a long enough runway, then maybe you need to stick to doing games part-time or find a way to fund it. It needs to be a long-term plan. I saw someone post in a forum recently they were going to leave their job, make a prototype to pitch to a publisher, and do it all within 3 months. And they had no experience. That's insane. Even for an experienced developer, that timeline's way too short. If you want to do indie development and found a studio, great, I'm all for it. Don't waste your time in the gray realm of experiencing neither victory or loss. But you need to give yourself a foundation to increase your odds of victory. If your runway is too short, you gotta find a way to fix it. Maybe find some trustworthy partners that can share the burden of founding the studio. Do what I couldn't do and develop the discipline to work on your game part-time until you can release that first game. Try working on it part-time, make a vertical slice to pitch to publishers. If publishers don't work out or you don't want to go that route, then try crowdfunding. Or if you're in a position where you can make some strategic life changes to extend your runway and what you have saved up, then try that, right? Do the millennial thing and move back in with your parents instead of paying rent, right? Because if you're a millennial like me, odds are you can't afford a house anyways. Let's hear it for being the first generation destined to do worse economically than our parents. Or be creative and find another way. I'm not saying don't pursue indie game dev full time, but I am urging you to set your expectations appropriately and don't gamble everything on that first release, right? I'm not expecting it until, maybe game 3 or 4. And my last bit of advice is for anyone who's, getting started on their first game right now. Scope. If you're at the point of creating your first game, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. But take the advice you've heard seriously. Scope your game to be like 6 months, and then maybe you'll get it done in a year. If you have more experience, then scope for 8 months or 9 months, and maybe you'll get it done in a year. I scoped my first game for about 8 months, and I'm 3 months in, and I'm already at the year deadline now, at least for my estimate. And nobody is 100% accurate on their estimates, But don't become one of those studios that thinks they'll develop a full open world action adventure game or RPG in 3 months or 6 months. It's not going to happen. AAA studios can't make that happen. If you're a small indie studio working on your first game, don't do open world anything. Right? Even if you finish it, it's not going to feel fleshed out. You can't make enough content to fill that world. If game development is secondary for you, then fine. Make something a bit bigger because you're making content for YouTube or some other platform. But if games is the priority, you need to scope appropriately. Again, for me, I have a runway of 3 years. I plan on releasing at least 3 games in that time, which means that my first game, I scoped 8 years. And like I said, I think now it's realistically going to be closer to a year. The next game, I'll probably scope for 6 months because this first game is going to take longer than I'm expecting. And then maybe on the last game, I'll scope for 9 months because I've done 2 other games. I'm better at estimating and I have assets and resources to go back to speed up the process. In summary, if you're starting out, don't rule school out as an option. Give it some serious thought. It could jumpstart your skills, and it's a way to make some connections from your classmates, instructors, etc. If you're going to make games full time, be realistic about your runway. Don't bank on your first game being a financial success. It's just going to doom your studio. And scope your games appropriately. Again, I'm Peter, the sole developer behind Growlery Games. This is Growlery's first video. I plan on doing a video once every 2 weeks or so, just talking about our journey, lessons learned along the way, and making any major announcements. I hope you got something out of this. Please like and subscribe, join us on this journey, and we'll see you in the next one.